ahead and record. We will record the lectures, and I'll post those recordings as we go along. And what I want to do is go over to e-learning, and I want to walk through the how to study guide with you. I know that some of you, of course, have already mastered how to study for the CPA exam, but it doesn't hurt for sometimes for us to refresh as to the approach that we take in this class. And then, of course, for people that are newer, this should be helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and get us into e-learning just so that we see where that how to study guide is. Okay, and if you take a look at, go ahead and put it into student mode, because there's a lot of traffic in there for me that you don't need to worry about. Okay, and you come down and you can see this file here called how to study. Okay, so what I'm going to do is open that here. I'm sure I have it downloaded on my desktop 52 times somewhere, but I'm not going to sit here and look for it at this point, and I'm just going to look at it from here with you. And I'm just going to sort of read along here, guys. I think it's fair for me to read this since I'm the one that put this together. It's not really reading, it's me recalling thoughts that I've had in the past, right? About how to study. And sometimes students say, well, I know how to study, dude. I got this far. Well, the idea here is how to study for fill in the blank, the CPA exam, okay, is the thing that we're focusing on. So I don't recommend that you read material before class. I don't think that's a good use of your time. It's an undirected read. There's a lot of material in the textbook that we don't necessarily have to read to be successful when we start to work the homework problems and not. So if you have extra time, get some rest. Don't sit there and use that time reading the book. I don't think you'll have a lot of extra time because of the time commitment that we'll be talking about to get through all the homework so that you can take your exam on the date that you have selected. We're shooting for September 10th. Remember, we talked about last time for this class. Come to class and note the flashcard suggestions. As we go through tonight's lecture, for example, you'll see that I'm going to call out flashcard suggestions. I'm going to put the word FC, or the letters FC, next to certain material that I want you to flashcard. Then after the class is done, maybe tomorrow, maybe during the balance of the week, as you're heading into the weekend and whatnot, you should then, number 3 here, make the flashcards that I have suggested. Okay, now your package that you acquired came with a pre-made set of flashcards. So if there's already a flashcard in the pre-made set, and those are not hard copy flashcards, you have to access those through the software. And I'm going to talk in a minute about, for folks that haven't received an email from Becker yet, how I'm handling that this term. But if there is already a flashcard in the software, obviously you don't have to make that again, but it is one to note as something that's important per our lecture that I pointed out to you. If there isn't a flashcard for that, you should make it. So you should probably go over to, Costco or Walmart or whatever and get yourself a pack of the 3x5 flashcards for those times when you want to actually make the flashcard. When you make the flashcard, it is a short question on the blank side, a short answer or bulleted points that answer the question on the line side. That's the way you make the cards. Now, once you have made all the cards, and that will probably take you, probably 2 to 3 hours to make the cards. Okay, once you've done that, then you memorize the cards. And by that, I mean memorize, no peeking. Okay, somebody else should be able to hold your flashcards, ask you the questions, and you answer them. Now, if you have somebody enough in your life that loves you enough to do that, that's great. Most of us, can't really point to that one person that's going to sit there and go through with us and it's a lot of flashcards. I don't believe in this concept. Some people will say only 10 flashcards per chapter. I don't believe in that one. I was studying for the exam. I had stacks and stacks and stacks of cards that I made to help me remember the important concepts. And so it's important that you do that, make those cards, and you're probably going to have to hold yourself accountable as to being able to actually recite what's on the answered side once you see the question that's on the blank side of the card. Then after you've done that, and that's probably half of the 8 to 10 hours that I think it will take you to study each chapter, then and only then do you start working through the homework questions. Okay, homework questions are the multiple choice questions and the task-based simulations, and you work those. There's several modules that we go through. I try to end the class by having completed a module, and so we will go through today and get through about half of the modules in the chapter, and so you should work the homework for those modules that we have covered that week. Okay, both multiple choice questions and task-based simulation. Now, when you work those, I say strive for 75. Okay, you want to get a 75% as you go through. You go through those questions the first time, you get 75% as your percentage correct, and they calculate your percentage, by the way, on multiple choice questions only. So if you're getting 75% on that, fine. Put that information away. You don't have to keep working those over and over again. That is not a good strategy for preparing the exam. If you fall below 75, let's say you worked 100 multiple choice questions and you got a 60%. That means that you missed 40. For those 40 that you missed, go ahead and you can click in the software so it'll have you only work the incorrect questions. Work those again. Well, first stop and try to understand, why did I miss these? Is there a pattern to these that I missed? Oh, okay, you know, I'm not really good with this concept. Let me add a couple more flashcards that will help me with that. Go back, rework those 40 questions, and if your overall percentage at that point comes up to 75, you're good to go. Don't keep working those questions over and over again. That will not help you on test day. It will not help you as you go through your final review. From our last day of class to September 10th is the final review period. And if you have ruined those questions because you now have the question memorized, instead of understanding the concept behind answering that question correctly, you have destroyed the material in terms of its ability to help you to be, you know, primed and be a multiple choice question answer machine on the day of the exam. Okay. And then I say spend about an hour or two working the task-based simulation that are part of every chapter. And there's always some task-based simulation in there for you to look at. Okay. So how do you get through all of that? And I give you a sample study schedule. I say Monday, spend 4 hours viewing the first lecture. Well, our class is on Tuesday. We have a 3-hour lecture. Don't worry about viewing the Becker recorded lectures unless on a 1-2 off case base, I tell you to go ahead and watch their lecture rather than us covering the material together. There are some small areas that I'll do that for because I think that, you know, it's a better use of your time to maybe watch their lecture. But for the modules and things that we cover together, don't watch their lectures. Okay, you're going to be here with me in 3 hours on Tuesdays. So this is, you know, assuming a Monday lecture schedule. For our Tuesday lecture schedule, you'd be here on the Wednesday. Then you could go through making the flashcards, etc., and begin working the homework questions. Okay, then go ahead and spend some time completing that maybe on Thursday. If you have made, you know, on Friday, I'm going to suggest you take a break. Okay, don't go crazy. I don't want you out all hours, you know, taking shots of, you know, Patron till you can't perform on Saturday. Because Saturday, you should probably spend about 4 hours working through the homework. Saturday night, you can go ahead and take another little break if you want to have a nice evening, you know, again, not getting too crazy. Because Sunday, you should have as your focus completing any undone homeworks, and then if there's still some time, some things undone on Monday, you should be going through and looking at that. And relatively shortly here, I will start coming in behind you on Mondays to see that you have done your homework. And if you don't do anything, I'm going to start, kind of prodding you to say, hey, what's going on? You need to be getting this homework done because you need to be taking the exam. We've given a date of September 10th, more critical date, or, drop dead date, if you will, for taking the exam is December 15th. And if I don't see you making progress towards even that date, the question was going to be, what are we doing here? Why are we in this class? Okay, so you don't want to get that email from me. So you want to make sure you're keeping up with that. Okay. Now, final review steps happen in the week between our last day of class until you ultimately take the exam. And I will be going through this discussion with you as we move closer to that final review time. Any question on that? Okay. Now, in terms of access to the software, and I'm looking right now and I'm seeing that I've got maybe 8 of you. Okay, so that is a small enough manageable group that for the 8 of you, only send me an email. Okay, it shouldn't be only a couple of you. Send me an email if you have not received that email from Becker that allow you to activate your software. Okay, I am not going to ask Golden Gate to send Becker any sort of communication about activating software for people who aren't attending class. So folks that aren't here today, I'm assuming they have decided they can't take the exam by December 15th, and I'm going to be encouraging them to drop the class. And there's no reason for Becker to send them access to software that for a class that they have not, committed to being able to, take the exam in time to, have the exam to take because it's going away in December. Question on that? Okay, so for folks that had already, been in a class with me, some of the, I'll call you veterans. Okay, for you guys, go ahead if you haven't already. Make sure you order version 4.1 for the BEC. Redeem your book. Redeem your book. You need to have that. Now, obviously, if you haven't received the email from Becker or you hadn't redeemed the software yet, the textbook yet, I should say, then you don't have the PDF. You don't have the hard copy of your book. It looks like this. Okay, you don't have that yet. And so if that's the case, then what you should do at this point is go ahead and open up the PDF that I have posted there for this chapter tonight. And as we go along, you should mark up the book with me as I go through and I mark up the book using the PDF annotator. So it's not a bad idea to have yourself a couple highlighters, have yourself a pen, so you could be making the notes, the flashcard suggestions as we go through. Question on any of that? Make sure, guys, do today, okay, is the CPA exam planning document. So make sure you have submitted that. If you have some situation of some pending information you're waiting for, just still submit that and indicate in the document that you're waiting for the foreign evaluation of education or whatever it is. But I do want to start to take a look at those because, again, I'm looking pretty critically at this in terms of somebody's plan for being able to take the BEC exam by December 15th.
Professor, it's Nicole.
Nicole.
I had submitted that planner, and I explained on there why I hadn't applied for it yet. It was because I just found out I was supposed to apply for it last week. I've since applied for the exam. Should I update that and resubmit or just make a note, or are we going to be resubmitting these throughout the course?
You know what? Just shoot me an email telling me that. So, and I'll remember this conversation. Okay, but just send me an email or a text or something. And that'll help as I'm looking at that. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other question? All right, good, guys. Looks like we've got a good group here and then that is really focusing on getting that exam done. So if there's no further administrative type stuff, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the lecture for chapter 1. Okay, now everybody hold your breath and say a prayer while I try to put the computer into tablet mode and hope the whole thing doesn't go haywire on me. And I feel like it already did close a bunch of things that I had opened, but not this chapter. Okay, so that's good. So let's just go ahead and roll with that. Put ourselves in full screen mode and take a look at the table of contents for chapter 1. Now, what I do for each chapter when we start it is give you a sense of relative point value, okay? Where I think are things that are naturally going to be a little more heavily focused than others. I see things where people start postulating about all these different things. You know, I saw one on the Facebook site, which I don't recommend you join for far, and somebody started pontificating on how the software will see areas that you're weak, and they'll continue to give you questions on that area where you're weak. And they were talking about derivatives. Well, under that logic, that would mean that someone could possibly get 50 derivative questions, which is never going to happen. Okay, so yes, there is no area that you can ignore. And so I'm not giving you these point values to tell you, hey, don't pay attention to this particular area, but there are areas that are core central areas that have long been tested that you can expect to see a little more heavy coverage of, just not only from the standpoint of the tradition of the CPA exam, but just from the standpoint of the nature of the discipline that we're studying at any point in time. Okay, so when we look at some of these modules tonight, okay, we're going to talk about the internal control framework, and we're really going to be looking at some things that have been put together by the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission, abbreviated COSO. You've probably heard about them in terms of the internal control framework that we will study tonight, and we will also study a little bit later in the auditing course. If you're taking that as well, you might have a little deja vu there, but also the enterprise risk management process. The enterprise risk management process is a more holistic, integrated approach to how to manage the risk affecting the entire organization, as opposed to the internal control structure, which is there to help address certain operating aspects of the company's business. Sarbanes-Oxley, an important statute that dealt with many factors, including internal controls. We'll go through and talk a bit about that. Sarbanes-Oxley is going on, it's over 20 years old now. So I'm sure you've had some exposure to that. At one point in time, that was sort of a new hat thing that was added to the exam. And then we'll talk about business processes. Again, I think maybe about a 5-point area here. I'm going to try to add a little bit, a couple of things, bullet points to the way the book has described this area, because I'm of the opinion that I can see that the book was obviously written by an auditor, and they got a little bit accounting documentation focused and left out operational aspects that might be relevant to the different parts of the business process. And so I'll add a couple of those thoughts. I think it's okay for me to do that. That's about as far as I think we'll get tonight. Next time, we will jump into financial risk management, which is those two modules together at about 10 points. I consider that one area. The only reason they break it into 2 parts is they're trying to make the modules of bite-sized pieces, but that's really one whole area that constitutes about 10 points. Okay. All right, so that gives you a sense. And again, it's not to say that you can, okay, he's saying 5 points, so we should ignore that. No, it's telling you that you should absolutely expect, maybe a task-based simulation, a lot of multiple choice questions in an area that's a 10-point. If something's a 5-pointer, maybe a portion of a task-based simulation, and not as many multiple choice questions as you might see, obviously, for a 5-point area. That's all I'm trying to do with those call outs of points, is give you that sense. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and let's take a look at the internal control framework and the entity back in the 80s that sort of put together an internal control framework is the committee sponsoring organizations of the Treadway Commission. And they gave us a structure that we can use to really, as auditors, evaluate the effectiveness of the internal control as it relates to various objectives of the business. The objectives of the business are compliance objectives, operating objectives, and then as auditors who also use this, it would be reporting objectives, financial reporting objectives would be the major thing we would focus on. But since we're not in the auditing section of the course, we're going to be thinking a little bit more about some of those other operating objectives, compliance objectives that we don't pay as much attention to as auditors, because management needs to evaluate the entity's internal control as well. We'll see that for public companies, Sarbanes-Oxley put that as a requirement of management into federal statute. But let's go ahead and let's take a look. And we say that the framework is used by company management. And again, as I've said, auditors use it as well, but we're not in the auditing course here. So we're focusing on company management and its board of directors to obtain initial understanding of what constitutes an effective system of internal control and provide insight as to when the internal controls are being properly applied within the organization. Now, we say that the framework is also useful to those outside of the organization, external stakeholders. And as I've said now a couple of times, we have the auditors who would use a similar framework. Now, we're going to see that as you take a look, that there will be principles that will fall under various components of this internal control framework. And it's basically, coming over to the next slide, a nice graphic that COSO put together. We're calling this the COSO cube, whatever that means. Sounds like some sort of alien. The COSO cube is coming. Okay, but we have this COSO cube, and we're sitting here, and we have the objectives of the organization. So this top panel is the objectives of the organization. And when we look, we have what? We have operating objectives, we have reporting objectives, we have compliance objectives. Now, we say that the objectives of the business cut across various levels of the business, at the entity-wide level, at the division level, and so on. Now, they give us the various pieces of the control components, I should say, the control structure here. And we have what? Control environment, and control environment sits at the top. Okay. We have the entity assessing the risk to achieving the objectives. Okay. Then we have information and then we have what? Control activities. And that's the rating that doesn't show up very well when I use red. Okay, then we have control activities. Then we respond by giving these control, well, we really respond to the risk through the control activities. And then we have to provide information, communication to our staff as to what their responsibilities are for the internal control. And then we monitor to see if we are achieving the desired objectives. That monitoring often happens through the internal audit function, and that internal audit function will report back to the board of directors, which are a key component of the control environment, or key principle within the control environment component. And so this could be a circle as we feed that back, and then we assess the risk and we go forward from there. Okay, so you can see this, and there is a mnemonic crime that is often used for this, that is used by Becker for this. The only problem is it's kind of got these where C stands for control environment, okay, and then R stands for the risk assessment, and then I would be information communication. M is monitoring, and then the E is, and you would put existing controls. Okay, is the way sometimes folks try to remember that, or you can just go ahead and make this as a flashcard. The problem I have, or you should make this as a flashcard. The problem I have with this crime mnemonic is that, it gives it out of order as to how the process should work. The way this is showing, the COSO cube is showing you this is how it should work. Control environment sits at the top. Then comes the assessment of risk. Then come the control activities. Then comes the information communication. We do all that, and then we monitor and see if we're controlling achieving the objectives, and back up to the control environment. Okay, so you take a look and you can see the objectives. Okay, operating objectives, reporting objectives, that's reliability and finance reporting, and the compliance objectives. Okay, and so when you look, you can go ahead and flashcard the objectives piece of this. Okay, and operating objectives are pretty obvious. We want to be profitable, but maybe we want to be socially responsible, and we can include that as an objective. Reporting objectives are really talking about reliability of financial reporting. Compliance, we want to be in compliance with the law. Okay, so we start to talk about the various components. We give you the mnemonic crime here. And so as we go through, we're going to talk to them in order of the crime mnemonic, but just keep, in fact, as I discuss them with you, I'm going to go in order the way COSO contemplated on, which is control environment, risk assessment, the control activities, then the information communication, then the monitoring comes last. Okay, so you can see here they're using crime, but so that kind of bothers me that they've got it out of order of how it actually goes. So this should be 3, this should be 4, this should be 5. Okay, but control environment is number 1, and I think this is useful in that the control environment touches all the other pieces of the components of the internal control. So it sits at the top, it sets the tone, it's arguably the most important piece, and frankly, probably an area where you'll see more questions than some of the other areas. Again, somebody's really proud of that mnemonic because they've given it to us now 3 times here, and plus I pointed it out also, but I pointed it out to point out to you, don't forget that, that crime mnemonic doesn't give the components in the correct order as to how they should be thought about. Okay, so you have what? You have 5 components. Okay, and under those components, you have 17 principles. Now, I just want to show you something. I don't know where I got this, but I think it's helpful, except that it closed. So that wasn't helpful, that it decided to close on me, but I'm finding it easily enough that I'm not too upset that it closed on me. But what I did is I went ahead and I have the 5 components, and then I list for you the 17 principles right here. So what I think you could do, maybe not a bad idea, is you could make this one big flashcard, or you could just go ahead, print this out, it's in Word, print it out, and then make a flashcard for each one of the components, kind of cut across this way, right, on this document horizontally here, and make a, then you got a flashcard. If there's not already one in the Becker, that list out the components, and then this, what ends up being the 17 principles that comprise the various components, or constitute the various components, the elements that constitute the components. So let me go ahead though and come back now, and we're going to talk about some of these principles here. Okay, I'm not going to sit here and read through every single one of these, but some of the key ones that I think you'll see in questions. Okay, so when we talk about the control environment, it's at the top. It is a commitment to ethics and integrity, and it points focus, including setting the tone at the top, establishing standards of conduct. So this is coming at the highest level of the organization. This is the board of directors, BOD. This is senior management, okay, setting that tone. Okay, now it includes as I've mentioned, the board, organizational structure that shows that we're taking this control environment seriously. And an organizational structure that I like to point to is having the internal auditors report directly to the board of directors. I was on an assignment when I worked for the Government Accountability Office, GAO. I spent about 26 years there. And one of the things I would always ask when I was looking at housing agencies, they call it board of commissioners. And I would always ask the management, do you have internal audit reports, and are those going directly to the board of commissioners? And then we would follow up with the board of commissioners to say, are you receiving these reports or reviewing those? How are you responding to those? That's the kind of organizational structure that you would look for to see that you have a good corporate governance, that you have a good control environment. And of course, I'm talking from the standpoint of an auditor, but an entity management or an entity board of directors that wanted to set up a good control environment would make sure that that sort of process, as I just described, was happening. Okay. Now, commitment to competence. Okay, so what are we doing there? We're making sure that there is a commitment to hire, develop, and retain competent employees. So you want what? You want a CPA, perhaps, to be the one that is your controller. Okay, these are the type of opportunities that come to you as you become a CPA. You'll probably get a chance, an opportunity to be a controller somewhere because you carry the competence. That license demonstrates the competence that you can carry out a responsibility such as a controller. Accountability, individuals are held accountable for their responsibility in internal control. That's why it is important that we do what? That we communicate those responsibilities and evaluate those for ongoing relevance while considering pressures and whatnot. So keeping folks accountable. Okay, so that's the control environment. Risk assessment. Okay, we start to take a look at the risk assessment, and it is up to the entity to identify and analyze risk. So even though auditors assess control risk as part of their responsibility, management needs to look and say, what are the risks that are going to both internal and external that are going to affect our ability to achieve our objectives, reliability, financial reporting, operating objectives, etc. So as you start to look at those points of focus, include analyzing internal and external factors and determining how to respond to those. Okay, now you come over and you take a look at information and communication. Okay, and so we want to communicate. We want to be able to obtain information, generate to use relevant, high quality information for the functioning of the internal control. But also we want internal communication and external communication. So when we're talking about internal communication, okay, information necessary to support the functioning of internal control, including relevant objectives and responsibilities. When we point to communicating with external party, points of focus include management having open two-way external communication using a variety of methods and channels. And I want you to put down that this includes our external auditors. Okay. Okay, good. Then we have what? And again, this is out of order for our, as monitoring really comes towards the end. So that's, guys, just keep in mind that monitoring is the last thing you do. They're giving it to us in the crime order, okay? But monitoring is what? Is something that there's two principles. It's ongoing. The monitoring is ongoing, okay? And then you have to communicate deficiencies. And again, that communicating a deficiency is really where that reporting function from the internal audit staff directly to the board of directors comes in. And then they wanted to go ahead and, have it in order of crime. So they put the word existing control activities. And again, the real order would be what? The control environment, the risk assessment. Then you look at those existing control activities and see if they need to be adjusted accordingly. You adjust the control activities accordingly. You communicate the responsibilities, and then you monitor is the way this thing actually goes. But control activities are set forth by the entity's policies and procedures and directives initiated by management to mitigate the risks. And then you communicate out those responsibilities, and then you monitor. Okay. Now, when you look here, they repeated what I gave you in a different sort of way, different words, whatnot. So you could look at this pass key as well, but 5 components, 17 principles. And then remember, they're putting, the existing control activities last because they want to spell crime. Okay. All right, now you come over and when we look at the effectiveness of the internal controls, we're looking at the design. We're looking at the design, okay? And we're looking at operating effectively. So not only do you need to design a good control, but then it has to operate. People have to understand their responsibilities and they have to be able to perform that. So it's not enough to sit here and just design all these great things and then they're not having operating effectiveness because they're not being used properly or they're not being used at all. And so it is not just a matter of having these components and these principles. They have to be have a good design and they have to be operating. Okay. Now you come down and let's take a look at ineffective controls and what COSO tells us about that, okay? And internal control deficiencies are shortcomings in the component or components and relevant principles that reduce the likelihood of an entity achieving an objective. So as you go through those 17 principles, if there's one of those principles missing, that could be seen as a deficiency, although maybe a particular principle for whatever reason isn't necessary. But as part of the evaluation, it's expected that you would address each one of those principles. And if one isn't relevant to a particular component, then you would call out, well, what's the reason that it's not relevant? Okay. There's a difference between auditing and what COSO says. When we're dealing with auditing, we call a deficiency a significant deficiency. And if a significant deficiency is going to result in a material misstatement, we call it a material weakness. COSO, they just use the word major deficiency because, again, they're not simply defining these as it relates to finance reporting objectives, whereas in the auditing world, we're really channeling in on the operating, the financial reporting objectives of an entity. Okay, and then coming down, the internal control framework and the limitations of any system of internal control. Flashcard this, guys, don't forget that you do have a written communication requirement that will come up in one of your task-based simulation. You will have 3 written communication tasks that you will have to write, okay? And those 3 written communication, they will grade you not only on grammar, but are you covering the nature of the question? So even if you don't know the answer to a question, use good grammar. And the best way to do that, they give you scratch paper. You should spend 15 minutes per written task-based simulation. They give you 3 of them. By the way, of the 3, there's one that is not graded, but you don't know which one it is. So you have to do well on all 3 of those. And the best way to do it, I recommend that you spend 15 minutes per written task. And you should spend about 3 minutes of that time outlining your response. And often what they'll say are, what are the limitations? What are the risks and benefits? Okay, so if you get a question that asks you what are the limitations of internal control, this would be a good way to remember how to organize your answer. Now, you don't write bullet points in a question. You would address these in paragraphs. So you would write down, breakdown, human failure could cause a breakdown in internal control. Human failure can come from misapplication of the control activity or misunderstanding of the control activity, right? Biases and judgments, issues relating to the sustainability of the entity's objectives, okay? External objectives beyond the entity's control, changes in regulation, etc. Circumvention of control through collusion. Collusion is when 2 people that had different responsibilities get together to override the separation of duty in the internal control, and then management could always be overriding the controls as well. So flashcard that, practice with your homework, with your written communication. When you look at the answers that Becker provides for the written communication, that can get a little daunting, because what they tend to do is give you 150% answer. Meanwhile, you're just trying to get a 75 on that, and the system will stop grading you after you get 100% on that. Meanwhile, there may be 150% of points available of things that could have been used to answer that question. So don't, and Becker is going to give you all 150% set of points, because they're covering the waterfront of what different responses for different students, different candidates might be. Don't think you have to write an answer as comprehensive as those that you see, but do take a look at those written answers, comparing yours to see that you picked up, a sufficient number of the items that are listed in their response, and make sure you're using good grammar. If you don't know the answer to a question, what you do is you sort of get points just by being responsive and using good grammar. So if the question, and of course wouldn't ask you this, said, who discovered America? And you're like, George Washington. And you sit there and you say, I am very happy that George Washington discovered America. No points for George Washington, points for what? Discovered America, points for using good grammar. Because George Washington discovered America, we now have America. Points for discovering America, points for America, no points for George Washington. You just want to survive those written communications. So even if you have no idea as to what the answer is, borrow from the question to use certain words that when the machine, it's a machine graded task, when the machine grades it, it's going to be like, using a spell check, whatever, grammar check, to see if you have keywords in there, and that's how it's going to decide to award points. Question on that?
Is there a length that you suggest that those be?
I would say a couple paragraphs should be enough. I mean, the point is it has to be long enough to address the things that they're asking you. So if they're asking you, here are 3 important factors that an entity would consider. Discuss points for and against considering these factors. Well, and I'm not doing the best job of describing that. Well, that would mean you would have 6 elements that you need to respond to, is where I'm trying to go with that. And that what? There were 3 things that they asked you, and then they asked you points for and against. So I don't think that you have to have 6 paragraphs, but you have to make sure that you have adequately addressed those 6 elements. And so maybe you break that into 2 paragraphs, for and against, but the key thing is covering each of the elements that the question asked.
Okay.
Okay, and that's why I suggest an outline will help keep you honest in terms of making sure you're covering those points, because if you've already outlined it, then you're just filling out. Don't provide them an outline, you're writing the outline down on your scratch paper, but then from that outline, you're building an answer that's using good grammar, full paragraph sentence as you go through.
Okay,
Is there
thank
another
you.
question? Yeah.
Is it pretty common for the response to include examples when when answering, when responding?
Sure, if you can come up with examples, that's great, but in your example, keep repeating those key buzzwords that were in the question. Because again, it's being machine graded, so you may come up with fantastic example and those, stupid machines looking for, those words and it's not there, and then they're not giving you points where you probably deserve them. So keep using those points. It's not being read by a person.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no person becomes involved in the grading unless you get to a point where you're just like a point or so off. Sometimes they'll bring in a human intervention in there, or there is a fee that you can pay to challenge your score, and then people start to look at that. I don't recommend that as a strategy because I've been doing this for 30 years, guys. I don't have nobody who's ever come to me and say, guess what, John, I challenged and I won. So I don't recommend that, okay, even if you're 1 point off. Sometimes people say, I've gotten emails from students over the years that say, I missed passing by 1 point, I give up. And I'm like, what? That's first and goal. You're 1 point away. I mean, could probably get the 75 now just by going in and taking the test again without even studying. What are you doing? Okay, so it's just daunting and discouraging sometimes to be that 1-2 points away. But by the same token, you could be buoyed by that. I'd rather you have that than tell me what I got a 65. At that point, I'm starting to say, well, what's going on here? And it's getting much harder to diagnose next steps. So again, the point of that being, if you're 1 point off, don't challenge them. But humans rarely get involved anymore in the correction of the exam. And I imagine with artificial intelligence, it's going to be probably even less involvement as they go along, if they start using some of that to actually grade the exam. Although I'm still a skeptic, I guess, about the artificial intelligence because, I keep sitting there and saying, well, then artificial intelligence. Meanwhile, I can't even get the right hand to talk to the left hand half the time with a lot of these systems that I use right here at the university. Everyone's babbling about artificial intelligence anyway. Okay, all right. So what we're going to do, guys, is we're going to look at some questions. And the way we work it is I generally give you about 2 minutes to look at a question, you respond, and then we go through the question together. Okay, so this is just giving you a sense as to how you'll see questions in your homework and then obviously ultimately on the exam. So I'll give you a couple minutes to take a look at this one. Okay, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll. Looks like just about everybody's had a chance, and we got a 75 on that. And in class, I like to see a 75% response. If you miss a question in class, let's say you get half of them right, okay, you miss the other half. That's fine, because if you miss some in class, all that means is that you know, you got 25% to go to, you're working at 75%, which is what we're shooting for. And so don't be daunted if you miss a question or two. Now, when you look at this one, we had a couple of folks you can see that wanted A and B. Nobody wanted C. Okay, let's go ahead and let's take a look at this. The correct answer was D. 75% of us got that. And when you look at this now, it says the external auditors assess the achievement of internal control objectives, communicate the assessment to management and the board of directors, communication by external auditors, illustrate which principle. Okay, so we're looking for one of those 17 principles that I showed you the flashcard for, and then I told you you should really, you know, look and memorize the flashcard. It talks about principles under the components. Okay, so they're looking for a principle. Now, financial reporting is what? Is an objective. Reliability in financial reporting is an objective, not a principle. Internal control information is not communication. It's information about the internal control, but it's not communication. They were looking for communication. Okay, internal communication is something that we do as a principle of communication, but the what? The auditors, they said, are external, so this would be what? External communication. Question. Okay, good. Let's take a look at number 2. Okay, guys, looks like all of us have had a chance to work this. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And to take a look, looks like most of us got this right. 88% of us anyway. Okay, which is a good rate for us. Okay, but let's just go ahead and let's take a look at this one. And a company that retains a CPA with appropriate knowledge, skills, and abilities to prepare timely and effective financial reports, applying the idea from which principle of effective internal control of financial reporting. Now, we know that we're looking for a principle, and what's somewhat interesting about this question of all these principles fall under the control environment component. Okay, But if we're talking about what? We're talking about competency, if we're hiring what? A CPA, okay? Integrity, ethical values, that's that tone at the top, management philosophy and operating style. Accountability is where we're holding individuals accountable for their responsibilities under the internal control. But financial reporting competencies is where you look for those that have the knowledge, skills, and abilities, in this case, for financial reporting. And yeah, a CPA is probably a pretty good, should carry those competencies. Okay. All right, good. Now you come over and we say, well, now that we understand, we have the 5 components, we have the 17 principles. How will we use that structure now to actually do the evaluation of the internal control? And so when we take a look at that, we're going to be doing an overall assessment, okay? And those are supported by component evaluations. The component evaluation then comes through the evaluating the principles, okay? Principle evaluation serves as a source for isolating and defining internal control deficiencies. Do we see a deficiency in one of the principles, and how are we going to address that? And then again, if a particular principle isn't relevant to our situation, then we're going to still want to document, well, why isn't it? And so that we carefully consider each one of the principles, and then we would then summarize the deficiencies, and then of course we would want to address those. Okay, now you take a look and common risk identified using the COSO, and we say material omission. So management identifies risk that could individually in combination result in omission or misstatement and this is for the financial statements. But again, this to me was written by an auditor, but you need to keep in mind for the BEC exam, it's not just financial reporting, it's also the compliance and the operating objective. Okay, but risk may vary as entities operate in multiple industries, regulatory environments, again, getting to that compliance aspect, transactional environments, management style, are they dynamic, active merger, acquisition, disventure environment, dynamic technological environment, high turnover rates. Okay, now you come over and let's take a look at fraud. Okay, now fraud really can come in 2 varieties. There's financial reporting fraud, and there's misappropriation of assets, sometimes called larceny. So there's lying, which is on the financial reporting side. There's stealing, which is the misappropriation of assets. Sometimes I've seen that called larceny. Okay, so what happens? The risk of fraud is typically characterized by either being financial reporting or misappropriation of assets, okay? And specific encounters include management bias in estimates and whatnot, the degree of estimates judgment, incentives for fraud, such as bonuses, etc. Okay, coming over, attitudes, rationalization. If there are unusual transactions, that could be an indication of some sort of fraud. Vulnerability to management override of controls. Now, there's something called the fraud risk, and some people will call it the fraud risk triangle. And if you're looking over my shoulder here, I am teaching a class in fraud this quarter at De Anza College, and so I went ahead and picked up the fraud examiner's manual to help me with that class. And in this sort of theoretical information here, in this guidance, they talk about the fraud risk triangle, and there's something called incentive and pressure. There's opportunity. I guess I'll put a box around each one of these. And then there's rationalization. That says rationalization. By the way, guys, my writing is nearly impossible to read. I understand that. And so when I go ahead and I'm writing things, I'll also call out what I'm writing. And so it's probably not a bad idea to listen more to what I'm saying than what I'm writing. Okay. So the fraud risk triangle include incentive and pressure. Incentive and pressure is the reason to commit the fraud. Incentive, bonuses, pressure. I'm going to get fired if I don't show higher net income. What do? You have financial reporting fraud. Opportunity, and opportunity really is weakness in the internal control. Okay, if there's a weakness in internal control, I'm here to tell you people are going to exploit that weakness. It's human nature. People figure out, hey, I can get away with taking home computers and nobody's going to ever ask me about it. Somebody's going to do it. Okay, so there's weakness in the internal control. Opportunity. Rationalization says, well, you know, I've been here all these years. They always promote, you know, people with full head of hair, and me as a bald guy, I'm not being treated fairly because they don't like bald people. So let me steal $10 million. Okay, that's the kind of do that, but I'm just telling you that that's what we mean by rationalization. Okay, and basically, when you're considering the potential for fraud, you're looking to see, do we have these factors, and how do we address these various factors? Okay, and then they kind of give some specific risks that would fall under these larger headings of the fraud risk triangle. Okay, now you can take a look, and management override and controls is something that is you know, very concerning when it comes to fraud. The history is, and you say Enron, you know, that everybody knew that there were problems and management just kept hammering away. Okay, and you know, you keep seeing these things. You know, I think that we look back at something like Enron and we say, well, we have Sarbanes-Oxley, so that will never happen again. And then you turn around and you see something like the case against Fox. I forget the name of it now, the computer company that sued them for defamation of character. But you look, and it was known all along that there were these problems, and they just kind of kept overriding. Of course, that's more of an operational aspect than a financial reporting aspect. But still, you know, you put these things in place, you're thinking these things won't happen anymore. And history shows us that, you know, they keep happening, unfortunately. Okay. All right. I can't remember. Does anyone remember the name of the company? It was a software company that counts the votes. And they kept saying that there were, you know, falsifying the votes. You know, you spend your whole life developing a company that does this work, and then somebody turns around and starts going around saying you were doing something that you were not doing, and they knew it was a false statement. You know, if you look up defamation of character in the law journals, that is the definition. Okay. All right, good. So you come over and you take a look at this next one now, which is illegal acts. And illegal acts, existence of investigation could be indication of illegal acts, reports of regulatory examiners, payments for unspecified services, that could be a bribe, right? Delinquent tax returns is obviously, if they're delinquent in their taxes, they're in violation of the law. And of course, these are focusing more on the compliance aspect, but go ahead and flashcard assessment of potential illegal acts and what those could include. Okay, now you come over and management considers how the risk of material omission and misstatement could be managed across the entity, and then management selects, develops, and deploys controls effectively and principles within each component to respond to the assessed risk. So basically, we're saying what? You've made the assessment of the risk, including fraud. Now you're going to respond with the control activities. Okay. Now, when you go ahead and you develop those, selection and development of controls can include, okay, and why don't we go ahead and flashcard some of these things? Workshops of control activities, inventories to map what the risks are, implement control activities over outsourced functions, consider the type of control activities, consider alternative controls, segregation of duties, we're going to talk about here in a couple of minutes, and then identify incompatible functions, again, helping you with that separation of duties that we'll talk about here in a couple of seconds. Okay. Then what? Then you can go ahead and select and develop general controls over technology. Okay. Now, general controls are over technology or things like the use of passwords and whatnot. Okay. So it can include any of the following: use risk control matrices, implement or monitor control activities, configure the IT infrastructure to support restricted access and segregation of duties. That would involve using passwords, for example, administrative security and access. You don't let general users make changes to the, operating systems and whatnot, etc. Okay. Then you can deploy controls through policy, documenting policy, deploy control activities through business unit, control regular and ad hoc assessment of the control activities. Okay, so go ahead and flashcard some of these key ones that I have highlighted here. Okay, and that's going to conclude our discussion of the COSO internal control. And I think we can go ahead and take a break. When we come back from the break, we will go ahead and pick up enterprise risk management, again, COSO. Okay. But now we're going to see how we will come up with a way of managing risk that is holistic in consideration of the values of the company, how the company creates value, and then how they manage the risk in the achievement of the creation of that value. Okay, but we'll go ahead, we'll take a break. We generally take 10-minute break since it's about, I'm showing about 6:17, just so we don't have to come back at a weird time. I'll go ahead and make it 6:30. We'll get an extra 3 minutes on the break and we'll come back. Okay, I'm going to pause the recording. Somebody help me out if I forget to start the recording again. Remind me so that we can capture the entire lecture. Okay, the recording. Okay, there we go. And we are going to pick up with our second module now. And we're, as I said just before the break, we're focusing on work of the Committee of Sponsoring Organization, the Treadway Commission, for our first couple of modules here. And now we're going to look at enterprise risk management. So we looked at the internal control component of the discussion, but really what happens? An entity wants to create value. And in creating that value, it is accepted that there will be certain risk associated with pursuing that value, whatever it is. And how can we look in a holistic manner to link our strategy to the value that we're trying to create, and then manage the various risks associated with that. Okay, and so that's really what COSO has done now with the Enterprise Risk Management Framework, ERM. Now, when we look at the discussion here, we're going to start out with some definitions, and then we're going to talk about, now that we've understood some of the definitions used in the ERM framework, how would we apply that to an entity's risk management strategy? Okay, so we start out here with value. Okay, and so what is value? Again, we're the definitions, and management decisions will affect the development of value, including its creation, preservation, erosion, and ultimate realization. Now, when you look at the creation of value, I think we tend to think of for-profit entities, commercial entities, and often what they're doing is creating some sort of financial value. Okay, it's shaped by strategies, market opportunities, etc. But not-for-profit and government organizations also try to create value. For not-for-profit, for example, it's serving those that are supposed to benefit from the activity of the not-for-profit. Government, and there is a requirement in the federal government, something that was passed during the Obama administration, that federal agencies do an ERM evaluation of their operations. And you say, well, what value would be created by a government entity? Well, for example, providing benefits to, say, veterans, if you're the Veterans Administration. Maybe if you're the Center for Disease Control, you're trying to help to prevent some sort of outbreak of something like COVID and that sort of thing, some sort of disease. So values are not limited to financial values is the point here. And so the ERM structure could be applied to both for-profit and not-for-profit entities. So why don't you go ahead and flashcard that, because that's something that may not be as intuitive, that it could apply to both profit and not-for-profit. Okay. Now, value, again, we're in the definition mode here, guys. Value is created when benefit of the value exceed the cost of the resource used. Okay, and that resources could include people, financial capital, technology, etc. Okay, so when we create value, we're creating something that is in excess. The value that's created is the benefits exceed the cost of providing those benefits. Okay. Now, value preservation. Okay, once you have created the value, of course, you want to preserve that. And value erosion, of course, would be the opposite, that over time value has eroded either because there's been changes that we haven't kept up with, or maybe we haven't maintained the value that we had originally created because we haven't had the proper controls, etc. Value realization, value is realized when it benefits, when the benefits created by the organization are received by stakeholders, either in monetary increases in stock value and whatnot, or what non-monetary, again, if we're not for profit or government entity, those that are receiving the benefits associated with whatever that activity is. Now, mission represents the core purpose of the entity. Okay, why are we even in existence? And I think that when we think of mission of a company, we often think, well, we are going to create a profit, whatever, right? But, entities go beyond that. Sometimes they'll say in their mission that they want to be the leader in clean technology or something like that, or clean, use of resources, whatever, environmentally responsible. You can include those sort of things as part of your mission. Okay, so vision includes aspiration. What does the entity hope to achieve over time? And again, that can be financial, but it could also be to be the industry leader, that sort of thing. Core values represent an organization's beliefs and ideals about what is good, bad, acceptable, and unacceptable. And of course, that's going to drive to a large extent then risks that we're willing to accept and not accept. So in our core values, we have environmental concerns, and we're an oil company. Well, maybe we're not going to drill for oil in certain parts of the world because we don't want to pollute what may have otherwise been a pristine environment or something. So even though we have our profit motives and whatnot, we're an oil company, we want to produce oil, but at the same time, maybe we avoid the risk of an oil spill because it doesn't align with our core values. So we're trying to bring the risks and the values together, and then we're going to manage those accordingly. Okay. Now we continue on, and they kind of call out definitions, and we're continuing with definitions. All of this is definition. And so culture represents the collective thinking of people within the organizations. Okay. Capabilities or competitive advantage produce value for the entity. What is our competitive advantage? What allows us to provide value better than others in the particular industry? Okay. Practices and enterprise risk management, which we'll be abbreviating ERM here, is an organizational practice continually applied to the entire scope of activities of the business. Okay. And so we're doing this in a way, we're conducting our business in a way that is going to manage the risk, and we're aligning those with our values, our core values, etc. Okay. And then integration with strategy setting. Strategy is set in a manner that aligns with the mission and vision, business objectives, and that, of course, flows from strategy. And basically, this is a holistic way of looking at how we're going to run our business to create value. The creation of value creates risk. How do we manage those risks in the ultimate creation of that value? Okay, so we come over and we start to take a look at that discussion now, managing and linking risk to value. And we talk about the notion of risk appetite. Okay, and risk appetite represents the types and amount of risk on a board level that an organization is willing to accept in pursuit of the value that we have been talking about. Okay. Now, risk appetite is expressed first in mission and vision, and risk appetite varies between products, business units over time, and the capabilities of management, okay, and adapting to changes in business conditions, etc. Okay, so when we have a relationship of value and risk appetite, and let's look at that. Managing risk with risk appetite enhances an organization's ability to create, preserve, and realize value. ERM seeks to align anticipated value creation with risk appetite and capabilities for managing risk over time. Since that is finally, after we've understood some of the other definitions, a sort of one-line definition of ERM, I want you to go ahead and flashcard that. Okay, so those are our definitions, and now we're going to start to take a look at how we will go ahead and use some of these terms now to understand in the process of linking our risk, our mission and core values to enhancing that value as we manage the risk. Okay, so we need to take a risk inventory. Okay, what are all the risks that could impact the company? Okay, what is a reasonable expectation? No one can predict risk with a high degree of precision. In other words, we can't be perfect. There could be some risk that, who would have known, right, back in 2019 that we would all go into a hole for 2 years or however long it was, right? So some things you just don't know that they're going to happen, and they happen, right? Okay, now our risk capacity, the maximum risk an entity is able to absorb in the pursuit of strategy and business objectives. Risk profile is a composite view of risk assumed at a particular level of the entity or aspect of the business that positions management to consider the type, severity, and interdependence of the risk that may affect the performance relative to the strategy. So again, we have these risks, and we are trying to manage those risks in the pursuit of our various business objectives, our value. Now you come over, and risk is evaluated at a department and divisional level. Related ideas include the ability of the entity to absorb risk and its ongoing management efforts. And we can take different views. We can take a portfolio view. A portfolio view, okay, is a composite view of risk the entity faces with which positions management and the board of directors, the types and severity and independence of risk, and how they may affect our performance. Organizational sustainability What is the ability of the entity to withstand the impact of large-scale events? And then performance of management, the measurement of efforts to achieve or exceed the strategy and the business objectives. Okay. Now, enterprise risk management and the interrelationships to what we've been talking about here. So ERM is depicted as a series of sequential yet intertwined components that drive the organization towards enhanced value. And so I think it's not a bad idea. We're going to go through and we're really going to be looking at these components down here. But it's probably not a bad idea to go ahead and see how these components then kind of deal with the intertwined parts of how we create value. Okay, so go ahead and flashcard this. That includes down here. See if it'll let me do it this time. That includes down here how we're going to evaluate the different steps in this against the different objectives of the company as they create value. What is our mission? What is our strategy? What are our business objectives? Implementation and performance, create the value. And then how do the pieces now of the components of the enterprise risk management interface with that? Okay, so you start to take a look here and we can see the components. And those components, of course, line up with, you know, 5 components that you saw in that graphic. Okay, and let's just go ahead and make sure we have flashcarded these components, which is governance and culture, strategy and objective setting, performance, review and revision, information communication, and reporting is ongoing. And then, of course, that'll feed back into our governance culture and so on. So even though we tend to put these as a first this, then that, it's also a circle at the same time that one piece feeds into the next. Okay, so those are the 5 components. And, you know, I guess Becker doesn't feel like it's doing you a service unless they give you a mnemonic in some cases. And sometimes the mnemonics, to me, exceed the benefits. You know, for example, because we're going to start to, just like we did for the internal control, we're looking at the 5 components, but then we're looking at, instead of 17 principles like we did for the internal control, we're looking for 20 principles. And the questions that you see will cover this, but I don't like mnemonics that start getting into remembering something like dove, soar, vapor, sir, tip. I don't like mnemonics like that. I feel that they cloud up your mind with things. And, you know, doves don't soar; they kind of flop around. So, you know, I don't care for this one. So, as a mnemonic, so what I recommend is that for each of the 5 components, you just go ahead, and you probably have a flashcard that does this already, but don't worry about the mnemonic. But for each one of the components, just flashcard the nature of the principles that come under each one of these without using the mnemonic, okay? And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to study several of these now over the next several pages as we go through and talk about COSO's enterprise risk management structure, okay? So starting with governance, and again, I don't think you need the mnemonic here, but we're going to flashcard the principles. But again, governance, corporate culture, highest levels of the organization, involves board of director oversight. Okay, establishing operating structure. Operating structure describes how an entity organizes and carries out its day-to-day operations. Okay. Defining desired culture. The organization defines the desired behaviors that characterize the entity's desired culture, and it will ultimately influence how the entity identifies risk and then whether it's going to accept those risks, et cetera. So that comes from culture. Okay. We need to demonstrate commitment to 4 core values. Okay. And you know, that's got to come from the top. Okay, that has to come from the very top of the organization. And then coming down, attract and develop capable individuals, our employees, and that's really going to be what our human resources folks that are going to help us to recruit people that have knowledge, skills, and experience. So go ahead and flashcard that a component, an important component or principle underneath our governance is what developing our human resources, developing individuals, hiring and developing individuals that embody what our core objectives are, what our culture is, etc. Okay, good. Now, strategy setting, and again, I don't know that you need the mnemonic, but strategy setting, and we take a look, we have a strategic plan that will develop through the process of setting strategy and business objectives that consider both internal and external factors as we set that strategy. The organization sets a risk appetite, and we're going to talk about there how to set that in a couple of minutes. And then business objectives allow strategy to be put into practice and shape the entity's day-to-day operations. Now, how do we define risk appetite? And I'm gonna say I'm not gonna have you flashcard this because this is pretty self-explanatory. So I don't think you need to flashcard that, but you will see questions that ask about risk appetite. But when we consider about risk appetite, it's in the context of creating, preserving, and realizing value. But entities consider risk appetite in qualitative terms, while others may be quantitative. The best approach for an entity is one that aligns with the analysis used to assess the risk general, whether it is qualitative or quantitative. And so general terms, and this is what I was debating having a flashcard, but I don't think it's necessarily necessary for you to flashcard that you could have a low appetite, high appetite, okay, are sufficient exposures to risk appetite, referencing targets, ranges, ceilings, or floors may also be used, okay? And so ultimately, risk appetite is expressed in the context of objectives, okay? So entities can have different risk appetites, right? Now, evaluating alternative strategies, evaluation of alternative strategies and potential effect of the risk and supporting the strategy and objective setting component strategy, evaluating two perspectives, the possibility that the strategy does not align with the mission, core values, and the implications of that chosen strategy. Now, you come over to the next page and we sort of start to get to, what happens if you misalign strategies may impede achievement of the mission and fulfillment of the entity's objectives, and the implications of each strategy include risk and opportunity, identifying risk collectively from a risk profile and serve as a basis for developing an alternative strategies. Okay, now you come over and you take a look at our business objectives. Okay, and when we form business objectives, are developed that are specific, measurable, or observable and obtainable. Business objectives may relate to financial performance, customer aspirations, operational efficiency, compliance obligations, or innovation. So again, I think as business majors and accountants, we tend to think of the profitability side, but there are other objectives that an entity may have, and the organization sets targets to monitor the performance. Monitoring performance includes the concept of tolerance, and let's take a look at what tolerance is. Tolerance is the range of acceptable outcomes relative to achieving business objectives within the risk appetite. Tolerance is also referred to as the acceptable variance in performance. Okay, so go ahead and flashcard that notion of tolerance. And just let's use an example. Let's say we're trying to develop a new drug to treat some disease. Let's use that as an example, okay? Tolerance would be, well, look, there are some risks, some side effects associated with that. you know, what is our tolerance for side effects that will cause death? Well, some entities may say, well, if there's any chance that this, you know, new medicine could cause someone to die, we're not going to pursue that. That's beyond it. If we're talking about that it's going to create maybe some minor side effects and whatnot, then we will go ahead and we'll potentially pursue that. Or we're not going to drill for oil in areas that going to have a, you know, impact on the environment that would be unacceptable. That's what we start to talk about. We talk about our tolerance. Okay. Now, once we have identified the risks, okay, in our within our risk appetite and our tolerance, then we will go ahead and perform. Okay, so risk is prioritized. We'll respond to that. Risk is prioritized according to the severity and its consideration of the entity's risk appetite. The organization then selects responses and monitors performance for change. Now, the identified risks, and let's start to take a look at this. And when we start to identify a risk, we start to assess the severity of the risk. Okay, what is going to be the ultimate impact on the company by these various risks? And obviously, the more severe the impact, the more we're going to want to address that particular risk. Okay, now I'm not going to put it up now, but I might put it up towards the end of class, but I want, because I'm afraid if I take my computer out of tablet mode, out of tablet mode, it's going to go crazy, and I don't want to do that right now. So towards the end of class, I'll show you this one, but I want to write it here because it's a good example of a question where you might go ahead. Maybe I can get to it this way. Hang on, I'm going to try to stay in tablet mode. I'm just wondering if I can get to it. Yeah, here it is. Yeah, that I don't want to do unless it's just going to give me my password. Let's see if it just lets me send back in that way. Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so this question, and I didn't care about trying to answer it because I don't want to get into all the details of trying to answer it correctly. That's why if you answer a question incorrectly, it's yellow, and I just chose one because I wanted to see the answer. Okay, but notice they come up here and they give us the severity, but it's not just severity, it's also what is the likelihood that this bad thing will happen. Okay, and then what they did here to rank these is they multiplied the severity by the percentage likelihood, and that's how they came up with sort of an expected value of these different bad things, and that's how they ended up ranking these. And you can see, because the 8.3 associated with the $20,235 loss of the cash register, well, the correct order was 3. 3 was the most impactful because it did what? It took the 7.5% on this 522,000, and that came up with the largest then expected value of this bad thing, and that's how they came up with it. B would be the second one would be the number one, or excuse me, the third one would be the number one problem. So the second one would be the number one problem. I guess the 169,000, I'm doing a very good job presenting this. The 169,477 times the 13.6% created the largest value, expected value. So that's why B was correct. Okay, so that's just giving you a sense of how you could evaluate severity. And when you evaluate severity, it's not just, where am I? It's not just the amount associated, but it's also what? It's also the likelihood associated with that. So you take a look, and the severity of risk is assessed at multiple levels. risk deemed severe at the operating level may be less severe than risk at the division level. So you can go ahead and flashcard that. And then as we saw in that little problem, severity measure relates to the impact and likelihood. Okay, and so go ahead and flashcard that. And that concept obviously would have helped you with that question that you see up there. That's why I wanted to show you what they're talking about there. Now, risk assessment includes this concept of inherent risk, targeted residual risk, and actual residual risk. Okay, so you have the inherent risk. It's the risk associated with doing something. We are going to develop a new product, and there's a risk that some people may be harmed by the use of this product. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to address those risks, but we're going to go ahead and have a certain amount of risk that we will want to accept, that we will want to manage somehow. And then there's some residual risk that no matter what we do, there's nothing we can do about it unless we completely avoid that activity. Okay, so let's just go ahead and take a look, and let's flashcard some of these definitions. Okay, inherent risk is the risk to the entity in the absence of any focused action to alter its severity. Targeted residual risk is the amount of risk the entity prefers to assume in the pursuit of the strategy, knowing that management will implement or has implemented directed focused action to alter the severity of the risk. And we're going to talk about different ways of doing that. And then actual risk is a risk remaining after we've taken the action. There's some things that we're not going to be able to necessarily do anything about. Okay, so we're just going to have to live with those. Okay. Now we come over and we come into implementing our risk responses. Okay, and I really feel that to a large extent, all of the things that we've set up until now have led us to then this discussion here. Okay, and I think that this is probably where you'll see, you know, task-based simulation question, multiple choice question, this sort of thing. So let's flashcard this stuff. Okay, now we could accept the risk. Means we'll take no action to change the severity of the risk. We could avoid actions taken to remove the risk. We just don't do the thing. You know, you could almost, because sometimes I think when we think of the idea of risk, we think of the, well, avoid it, you know, don't do it. But you deal with risk every day that you don't avoid. Okay, for example, what happens? You drive a car. Well, what's the risk? The risk is injury, death, you know, from driving a car. That's a risk that you deal with every day. Okay, and if you want, the risk is that there'll be an accident. So when you start managing risk, you're assuming the bad thing is going to happen, unless, of course, you avoid it. Okay. Now, if you avoid it, then you just won't drive the car. If you accept the risk and you take no action, then I guess you won't wear a seatbelt. You'll drive cars that have no airbags in them. Okay. So let's just say you won't wear a seatbelt. So you'll just accept the risk. You could pursue the risk. Okay. Pursue the risk. Action taken that increases the risk to achieve improved performance. So what are you going to do? You're going to go ahead and you're going to drive faster. Even though you're pursuing now that risk of injury by driving faster, but there's a perceived benefit that you're going to get to your destination faster. By the way, the studies show that you don't really get there any faster by driving faster. You save yourself, you know, 30 seconds or something stupid, right? Okay. Reduce. Action is taken to reduce the severity of the risk. You buckle a seatbelt. I don't know why we don't wear helmets when we drive. Why not? I mean, you know, a lot of the real serious injury is going to be head injury. Why don't we wear helmets when we drive? Well, you know, I guess people don't want to mess up their hair or whatever. I don't wear a helmet, but we do things like put airbags in there and stuff, right? And then share the risk, take action to reduce the severity. Classic example there is what just related to our car driving example is insurance. Okay, so all of these things, sharing that risk with the insurance company, but at least the financial aspect. Okay, now you look at this and you could relate this to, driving a car, right? Okay, and again, the key thing, way to think about these responses is the responses are in the context of assuming the bad thing is going to happen. Okay, and you could just accept it, or you could start to go, or you could avoid it, or then you could start to go down these other ways of reducing the impact, sharing, etc. Okay. Okay, good. Now you come over and you take a look, and when we do this, we should take a portfolio view. The organization evaluates and develops a portfolio, an entity-wide view of the risk. Why don't you go ahead and flashcard that the portfolio view is an entity-wide view of the risk. Okay. Now, if there are changes, you have to assess substantial changes and include identifying internal and external environmental changes related to the business context, as well as changes in culture. Okay. And, I think probably when COSO wrote this, they had no idea as to how rapidly culture would change in the world. Okay. And so this to me is something that, has increased the importance of reviewing these things, because the changes are coming, exponentially, it seems, these days. And so companies really need to think about this kind of the changes. Okay. Then evaluations may relate to potentially incorrect assumptions, implemented practices, and entity capability or cultural factors. Okay, so you should pursue improvements, obviously, in your enterprise risk management, and then the information communication reporting is something that is ongoing. And they tell us that we should leverage information technology, helps the organization be more agile in decision making. Okay. Good data management is integral to the whole process. So you should have data and information governance, promote standardization of high quality data, process controls, data reliability. Data management architecture refers to the fundamental design, and design is driven by management's needs. Okay. Communication of risk information. The organizations use communication channels to support enterprise risk management. Communications are made to internal and external stakeholders, just as we said for the internal control, right? Types of reports. You can take a portfolio view. You can take a profile view when you're talking about these reports. Okay. And then reporting on culture seeks to measure and provide feedback on behavior and attitudes. So, for example, benchmarking to other entities or standards, compensation schemes that potentially influence on decision making, lessons learned analysis. So all of these things would go into how you would report on the enterprise risk management. Okay. All right, let's go ahead then. Let's take a look at a couple questions. And again, guys, I did not go through it in SOARs and TIP and all that. You can make that, or I bet you already have that flashcard made for you. And so that helps you to remember the principles that fall under the components. And my objective was more to get you to sort of get a feel as to how we're doing this holistic approach now as we consider risk and the pursuit of value and how we manage those. Okay. All right, good. Let's go ahead then with all that, and let's take a look at another question. Okay, guys, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll because it looks like everybody had a chance to try this one. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll here, and everybody got this right. Okay, good. So of the components here, governance and culture is the one that talks about commitment to core values, right? Okay, good. Okay, let's go ahead and let's take a look at this next one. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll because again, it looks like everyone's had a chance to respond to this one. And okay, I'm a little surprised that only 57% of us got this right. 4 of us got it right. Okay, so we take a look and they say the correct answer is C, but let's take a look. Able Corporation owns numerous businesses along the coast of Florida. The company's management has identified business interruption events as a potential risk resulting from storm damage caused by a hurricane. The company elects not only to insure its properties, but to buy down standard deductibles with additional premiums. In other words, take additional insurance here. Abel's response, well, avoidance would be what? I guess move out of Florida. I mean, that's the only way I could see avoiding hurricanes that you think are going to come, unless you got some way of influence the weather. So I would say, no, that's not avoidance because they're not talking about moving. Reduction of the risk. I don't see how you can reduce that risk unless maybe if you move some of your facilities out of Florida, but left others there. Acceptance would be doing nothing. Insurance is the classic example of sharing. Question on that? Okay, good. Come over then, and let's go ahead and let's take a look at Sarbanes-Oxley as we move into our next module. And, you know, I think that at this point, Sarbanes-Oxley has been around so long that you're probably pretty familiar with it, but let's go ahead and take some time to look at some of the key aspects that we need to know for our BEC exam. Now, you know, Sarbanes came out of scandals. Sarbanes, as you probably know, was the Democratic senator that helped push this through. Oxley was the Republican House member that helped push this through, and it came out of the wake of some of these financial shenanigans schemes that got Congress to feel, well, look, we need to act on this. Okay, so this goes back to 2002. Now, as we look at this, we sort of organized it by title, section, and that sort of thing. At no point on your CPA exam do you need to cite a title or section of a federal statute. That's not going to happen. Okay, they're not going to say which of the following is in Title III. They're not going to ask you that. But we organized it by title. The key things is for you to understand what the key responsibilities are, and we really focus on the responsibilities of management here in the BEC class. It did bring in, and we'll mention in a little bit here, responsibilities for auditors as well, that we get to more when we do our auditing class. Okay, but it relates to public company. Okay, it relates to public company because it is a federal statute. Under the idea of interstate commerce, we can regulate, public companies because they sell their securities across state lines, right? So what happens? Sarbanes said you have to have an audit committee that is directly responsible for the auditors and the audit. Okay, so they are the ones that fire the accounting firm, etc. Okay, the auditor reports directly to the audit committee, and the audit committee is responsible for resolving disputes between the auditor and management. So we've got creating this appeal level for the auditors to the board of directors, and they're the ones that are ultimately responsible. The audit committee is the one that's ultimately responsible for the conduction of the audit. Okay. Independence requirements: audit committees members may not accept compensation from the company, from the issuer, the public company. Audit committee members may not be affiliated person of the issuer. Okay, so we can't be influencing financial decisions. The audit committee must establish procedures to accept reports of complaints, whistleblower hotlines. So procedures must accommodate confidential, anonymous reports by the employees of the issuer. I mean, as you start to look at these things, if you understand what happened with Enron, there was an individual in the company that kept saying, hey, they shouldn't be doing this. And they kept kind of pushing that person aside and almost, frankly, punishing that person. And so that's why they started to come up with some of these whistleblower protections. Procedures must accommodate receipt and retention of complaints. Going over to the next slide, corporate responsibility for financial reports. The CEO and CFO are responsible for the annual and quarterly reports. They must sign and certify regarding those annual reports and quarterly reports, and include assertion that, let's flashcard some of these, okay, that they have reviewed the report. The report does not contain untrue statements. The financial statements fairly present information. The CEO and CFO sign the report have assumed responsibility for the internal controls. That's why it's important that we have that COSO model that then is used to carry out this responsibility in federal statute for CEOs and CFOs. So they have to certify that the internal controls have been designed to evaluate the material information has been made available. Internal controls have been evaluated for the effectiveness within 90 days prior to the report, and the report includes their conclusions as to the effectiveness of the internal control. Okay, continuing on, more flashcard and signing the report. You can make it one flashcard if you want. They are asserting that all significant deficiencies and material weaknesses in the design of the internal controls. So that's why we go through COSO, look at all those 17 principles. If something's missing, something isn't operating correctly, that constitutes a material weakness, a significant deficiency, using the language here of the auditing standards instead of what COSO uses, and any fraud that involves management or employees with significant roles. And they must represent whether they have been any significant changes to the internal control. Now, in signing these things, okay, what's happening is they're putting themselves on the line, not only from a standpoint of financially that we'll get to in a second, with forfeiture of certain cash bonuses and profits, but they could be subject to criminal penalty, in other words, jail time, if they have fraudulently done some of these things that they're saying they haven't done in these reports. Okay. Now, in addition, they kind of call this disgorgement of ill-gotten gains. Okay. So if an issuer is required to have a restatement due to material non-compliance of any financial reporting requirement, then they would have to give up bonuses and gains on the sale of securities as a result of that. They call that disgorgement. They're sitting there saying, hey, if you benefited from something that was wrong, you're gonna have to give those bonuses and incentives back. Okay, now coming down, and again, you don't have to worry about titles and sections, but let's look at conflict of interest provisions. Okay, issuers are generally prohibited from making personal loans to directors or executive officers. Exceptions apply to consumer credit loans that are made in the ordinary course of business. So it doesn't mean that if I'm an executive with Chase, that I can't have a Chase credit card. Okay, it doesn't mean that. It just means, hey, they can't call out and give me a special loan or something as an executive. And exceptions apply if terms offered to the officer are generally those made to the public. So if they're sitting there and they're giving me some special interest rate or something, that wouldn't be okay. But if it's the normal terms, then that would be acceptable. So flashcard those exceptions. I could see CPA exam question wanting you to know that. Okay. Now you come down and we talk about management assessment of the internal control, and that's under section 404 of Sarbanes, and that's the one that is auditors and CPAs we hear a lot about. Okay, and under that, management needs to state that they are responsible for the internal control, that they have made an assessment, and they have to give their assertion as to the effectiveness of that internal control. And then in turn, the auditor for public companies must attest as to that assertion. Okay, so you can go ahead and that assessment by management. So you can go ahead and flashcard all that under section 404. Code of ethics for senior officers. You know, entities in general should have a code of ethics. I was on an assignment some years ago looking at corporate credit unions. Congress wanted us to look at the credit unions, and maybe it wasn't corporate credit unions at that time. Congress asked us to look at credit unions, and one of the things, one of the banks that one of the credit unions that I was looking at, there's some shenanigans going on between board of directors, members, and employees and whatnot. And when I asked to see the code of ethics that they had about such relationships that to me didn't seem should be happening, they turned around and said, well, we don't have a code of ethics. And so that was a pretty easy recommendation that the National Credit Union Administration required credit unions, although they're not public entities, through the NCUA, they could require that they have a code of ethics. And then the criteria that I cited in that case was, well, look, it's in Sarbanes-Oxley for public companies. It should be extended to credit unions. And so we went ahead and made that recommendation, and NCUA accepted that recommendation. So most entities should have some sort of code of conduct for senior officers and whatnot, whether they're a public company or not. Okay, good. You come over and disclosure of audit committee financial expert. Okay, now let's see. At least one member of the audit committee should be a financial expert and disclose the existence of financial expert. The issuer must disclose the existence of financial expert on the committee or the reasons why the committee does not have a member who is a financial expert. CPA candidates, this is you. This is something that you should see as a goal for your career at some point in time. I see you sitting on the audit committee of a corporation as that financial expert. They need you in that capacity. State of California requires that there be a member of the board of director that meets certain requirements, financial expert. So that's also in the state of California. But also now they want individuals that they want gender diversity, ethnic diversity, etc. And so this is a great opportunity for you to look for that, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but down the line in your career. Okay, so let's see what kind of knowledge you're going to need in order to be that financial expert. And of course, understanding of GAAP, experience in the preparation of audited financial statements, like preparation or auditing. Okay, experience, I should say, with internal controls, understanding audit committee functions. Okay, so go ahead and flashcard that. I could see a CPA exam question asking that, and I think by getting your CPA, you will get these things, and so that's a good motivation for you as well. Okay, and then the Security Exchange Commission is required to review disclosures made in the 10K on a regular systematic basis. And they have a way of going about that, but the SEC, and this is Sarbanes, the federal statute now directing the secretary of the Security Exchange Commission, saying that what issuers should have material issuers that have material misstatements would be reviewed, issuers that experience significant volatility in stock prices. Okay, issuers with large market capitalization. Market capitalization is saying what is the amount of stock that they're raising and whatnot. It's a little dollar value. Emerging companies with disparities in price to earnings ratio. Issuers whose operations significantly affect any material sector of the economy. Okay, and so the SEC has this general guidance, and I don't think they would share it with us necessarily, but they probably have certain tripwires that will cause them to really get in and evaluate companies. And 10K is the annual filing that corporations are required to file with the federal government, with the SEC. Okay, now criminal penalties for altering, destroying documents. Okay. Jail time is what we mean by criminal penalties. Statute of limitations. The statute of limitations for security fraud is no later than the earlier of 2 years after the discovery of the fact or 5 years after the violation. Okay, that seems a little short to me, but okay, it is what it is. So go ahead and flashcard that. And then let's take a look at employee whistleblowers. So employees who lawfully provide evidence of fraud may not be discharged, demoted, suspended, threatened, harassed, discriminated, any of that bad stuff. Okay, and they may file a complaint with the Secretary of Labor and be provided with compensatory damages, if I'm saying that correctly, including restatement to the position with back pay and interest and compensation for damages such as money that they have to spend on lawyers and that sort of thing. Okay, so go ahead and flashcard that. And here we go, guys. Fines and prison terms set up for this stuff. Okay, and even if you don't do the thing, if you attempt and conspire to do the thing, then you are also going to be subject to penalties and jail time. So conspiracy, sometimes people say, well, I didn't actually do it. I just, talked to them about it and told them, well, that's conspiracy. And you can be just as guilty as the person that actually carried out whatever the violation is. Okay. Okay, good. Come over. And let's take a look then at a couple multiple choice questions relevant to Sarbanes. Okay, guys, it's been about 2 minutes, not 10 minutes, 2 minutes. I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll. And looks like most of us got this right, okay? And that the answer here is C, experience with internal controls. No, nothing about being a certified financial planner, okay? Being a certified financial planner means that you're able to give financial advice and whatnot, but we don't expect the financial expert, it's okay if they have that, but there's no expectation that the financial expert have experience as a CFP. Okay, good. Let's go ahead and let's take a look at this next one. Okay, guys, looks like all of us have had a chance. So even though we're well under the 2 minutes that I generally give, all of us got it right. Okay, so that's good. And that what receiving a personal loan is something that is prohibited under Sarbanes. Okay. All right. I think we could get through this module, but I also think that we can complete this module in the last 2 modules next time, and that'll keep us on track for B1. So I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the class, I think, at this point, even though we're a little bit early, and then we'll kind of put that in the bank towards next time. Okay, so keep up the good work here, guys. I am looking at who is left here at this point, and those folks that do need to receive the email to activate their software, please send me that email maybe right now in a little extra time I'm giving you. And then I will go ahead and ask GGU to ask Vector to send you an email so you can activate the software. Okay, so do send me that so that we can get you that here, hopefully towards the end of this week, so you have some time to start getting into the B1 homework. In the meantime, be going through these first 3 modules, making the flashcards, memorizing the flashcards, and preparing yourself to start work the multiple choice questions once that software is activated. And you may even want to take a look at that how to study guide again to make sure that you're proceeding accordingly. For everyone else who already has the software activated and whatnot, make sure you have ordered, and everybody should order, redeem the BEC book 4.1. I'll continue to post the PDFs here for a while, but eventually I'm expecting you to turn over and get that book. Question? All right, guys, good work. I will see you on Tuesday next week. Some of you I'll see in audit class on Thursday, okay?
Thank you.
Okay. Good night, guys.
Professor, can I ask a quick question just about the register?